Urban landscapes often seem complicated because there are so many windows, doors and perspectives. It can be intimidating to approach, especially with all the walls going this way and that. But today, we're going to simplify things using a rooftop scene as our example. I'll show you how to make it easier by not focusing too much on the details. The good news is, we'll mostly be improvising and skipping a lot of details. But we will keep in mind the composition and colour combinations, trying to capture the atmosphere with simple, easy techniques. As I mentioned, we're working with rooftops. I'll show you the process, but remember, this isn't the final version. I'll be tweaking a few things as we go. I've improvised a few times already, and I recommend you try out references that you enjoy too. It's one thing to copy, but creating your own piece is the next level. It might feel like, I can't do this yet, but trust me, once you start trying, you'll get the hang of it. So let's start with the horizon line. Keep it classic, around 1/3 of the paper, and I won't use a ruler for this part, we'll just go with the flow. I want to challenge the idea that architecture always needs to be perfect. Once you understand the basics of perspective, you can relax a little on the exact measurements. The key is knowing the laws of perspective and using them to guide your work. Here, I'm drawing a building that angles away from us. You can see the vertical lines and how it expands as it moves further back. The perspective rules are at play here, and as I draw, I want to share a bit about cityscapes, especially rooftop views. These can be intimidating because there are so many shapes and they all seem to go in different directions. But don't worry, we're going to break it down. When sketching cityscapes, perspective helps organise everything. The closer things are, the larger they appear. The farther they are, the smaller they get. This way we can place the buildings correctly in space, ensuring they fill up our drawing in a balanced way. Now, a bit about composition. Once you've mastered the basics, you can start to relax a little. At first, you might want to measure everything, but as you get comfortable, your brain will automatically understand where things need to go. And that's the beauty of learning perspective. Once you know the rules, you can make it easier on yourself. So here's what I want to say. There are a lot of buildings in the background, but we won't focus on each one. Thanks to aerial perspective, we can create this effect where we don't need to draw every little detail. Instead, we use subtle strokes to hint at buildings in the distance, and it should blend into a soft, less contrasting mixture of shapes. That way, we get this effect of things merging together. For example, in the background, I've got the St. Isaac's Cathedral. If you're trying to depict recognisable landmarks, pay attention to proportions. You want to make sure that St. Isaac's doesn't turn into, say, Hagia Sophia, and suddenly we're transported from St. Petersburg to Istanbul. It's a common mistake. Sometimes the dome gets altered and we don't want that. So even if it's just a silhouette, make sure it's recognisable, that's what matters. Now, as for the buildings around, I put this composition together myself. I took inspiration from a few photos. One had the right placement of buildings on the right side, another on the left, and a third had colours I liked. And then I started composing, making sure it really felt like St. Petersburg, especially with St. Isaac's Cathedral in the background. I won't focus on capturing the exact shape of the dome. It should be a little more narrow than I've drawn, but we'll leave it at that for now. The sun is coming out from behind a cloud and shining brightly, which gives me the perfect light to focus on. Look at how the lines of the buildings converge towards the St. Isaac's Cathedral. This is a common composition technique where the lines guide the viewer's eye in the direction the artist wants. And in this case, I want to lead your gaze toward the cathedral. Now, the main thing here is not to get caught up in all the tiny details, but to focus on the composition, especially the colour composition. This step is kind of like a bridge between realism and abstraction. Some people dismiss abstraction, thinking it's just random, but in reality, there are many nuances and rules to it, lots of compositional elements involved. So, moving away from pure realism is actually a step forward for an artist. It's a sign of greater artistic independence because we're not just trying to copy nature exactly as it is. We're artists, not photographers. And that's where the beauty of creative expression comes in. The house is already positioned more openly towards us. Now, I'll still outline. Look here. The first thing we do is set the general shape. Again, you can change the composition depending on your taste. I'm just showing you the process and some principles. So, here, look, these lines, they start to fall down. Our brain constantly wants to turn everything so the lines would be parallel to the roof. Yes, it might be like that. Well, I think that's all I wanted to show for now. Let's take a look. We have two main houses here, 1 and 2. For some reason the windows here are a bit slanted. Look, this line of windows can mess up the overall look. Ta-da! It's starting to look beautiful. I already like how it's coming together. It's getting interesting. This roof here looks great. Now, when we're working on a panorama, it's really helpful to use some rough drafts. I highly recommend making trial sketches and drawing houses in different positions to see how they look, then thinking about the composition after each one. Is your composition balanced? Is one side full of houses and the other side empty? For example, look here. My composition is balanced because I have this big roof on the left and a smaller one. But I'll add another roof in the foreground to balance things out. The next thing is linear composition. If all my houses were lined up like this, look, I want to show you this moment. I've got 3 houses here in a row, and they kinda mess up the view. I tried to leave more space between them so it wouldn't be too crowded. Let's see how this plays out. But of course, composition isn't something that comes right away. Sometimes people are born with an eye for it, but for most, it's developed through practice. We focus a lot on composition in our still life course. I'm only touching on it briefly here. Why do I mention this here? Because when we move more into abstraction, we start stepping away from realism, focusing less on precise details. At this stage, we need to make sure our drawing doesn't turn into something childish, like little houses. We need to focus on the composition, and of course, this is a constant process, a continuous improvement. So do rough drafts. Before we get to colour, I highly recommend doing a colour draft. Once your lines and composition are in place, make a quick colour sketch to see how the colours will fit. This way you'll save time later. Also, you'll get a feel for how your composition works with the colour palette. In this particular project, we'll work with warm and cool tones, creating a rhythm. We'll have a cool background, a warm sky, and alternating warm and cool roofs. I'll tell you more about this when we practice. Now, let's start with the sky. We're going from broad to detailed. I'm grabbing a big brush to start with, and I'll keep using the large brush for now. I'm wetting the paper for the sky, but we'll leave the foreground for later. This will be more detailed and precise. The reason I'm wetting it is because I want the sky to have a smooth, soft transition. To make sure the St. Isaac's Cathedral stands out against the sky, I'll blend the horizon line with a smooth, wet transition. That'll create a misty effect, giving the illusion of depth and perspective. You don't need to flood the paper with water. Just make sure it's wet enough to work on. This particular paper has a rough texture. I made a few sketches on a smoother side earlier, but for this, I'm using the rough side, which absorbs water and light differently. It's good to know that this side soaks things up quite a bit, and you'll need to keep that in mind while working. Now, while the paper is still wet, I'm mixing a light blue with a touch of pink to give it a slightly violet tone. I'll start painting some soft, distant colours right here, light pinkish streaks in the sky, and a hint of those reddish-orange spots on the roofs of the houses. This adds a sense of rhythm as the warm and cool tones alternate. As we move closer to the foreground, I'm trying to keep the colours clean and lighter. Don't worry too much about the mixing right now, though. Just keep working quickly while the paper is still wet. We have time to blend the colours together. The houses are still light, not too dark, so I'm working quickly. I've quieted down a bit while working. Let me just quickly say, don't focus on making the darker areas too dark yet. Try to keep the colours clean. The goal here is to create contrast, especially with the light and shadow. For me, I want the roofs to be bright and the contrast between light and dark to be strong. For the sky, I'm adding a blue hue in the background which will eventually blend out. There's a large cloud coming up, so I'm mixing dark colours, black, blue, and a bit of dark purple. This will create a stormy cloud hovering above. I'm layering this dark cloud here. It's the main storm cloud, and it's darkening the sky. I'm adding streaks of dark colour near the bottom of the cloud to make it more intense. The cloud stretches far into the distance. If you feel the paper drying, don't go back into it. Once it starts drying, just leave it be. The beauty of watercolour is letting it dry naturally, and as we move through the process, we're working with different colours. We don't even have to rinse the brush every time, and that's a good way to keep the colours fresh. You can even work with some dark tones, and if it runs more than you want, you can always dab it to soften the effect. Now, we're going to skip washing the brush between colours, so we don't end up with muddy colours. To keep everything clean, I'll use two brushes, one for warm tones and another for cool ones. This way, the colours stay fresh and vibrant. Now, let me show you what I'm going to do with St. Isaac's Cathedral. I'm going to add a bluish tint to it, something like this here. And then we're going to add a little trick. I'll add a glow effect on the dome by blending in a little warm orange right next to the cool blue, but without mixing them. We'll let the colours sit side by side, creating an interesting contrast. It's still a bit of a mix right now, but I'm really liking how the stormy sky looks and how the glowing cathedral is shaping up in the background. Although, I think I made the dome a little too big. Somehow I went over the line, so it's looking a bit heavier than I intended. But oh well, that happens. Thanks for sticking with me through these lessons. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support helps the channel grow and motivates me to make even more interesting videos for you. If you'd like to support the channel financially, you'll find ways to do so in the description below this video. You can also subscribe on Pat to see even more lessons that aren't on YouTube yet, or sign up for group or individual lessons where I can give feedback on your work, techniques, and personal development. Also, check out my Telegram and Instagram for more useful and interesting content. Thanks again for watching, and let's keep going with the video. Now, let's move to the foreground. Here, we need to create some vibrant blended colours. Even though we're painting a grey St. Petersburg, I'm adding a little more colour. This is my personal interpretation of the city. You can choose your own colour palette, of course, but that's why I recommend making some colour sketches beforehand. All right, let's move to the roof now. This will be a simple metal roof, and I'm going to give it a bluish tint. There will be some orange highlights on it, but the roof itself will lean more towards a violet tone. It won't be completely violet, just a bit more subtle. So I'm mixing blue with a touch of pink, creating this nice gradient. Now, I'm going to add some darker spots where shadows are. You can already see how it's coming together. By using a damp brush, I create a nice gradient effect as the colour moves downward. If the paper is still a little wet, it helps the colours blend smoothly. I'm going to add a little reddish-brown tint using Indian red to give a rusty effect on the roof. This makes it look a bit more textured and realistic. For the shadowed areas, I've mixed ultramarine with Indian red to get a darker, more muted purple. This part of the roof is in shadow, and it's really starting to look nice. I love the texture that's coming through, especially with the dry brush technique. It's a bit of a wow moment, right? I just have to share this with you. It's so cool to experiment with these techniques. I remember once a student said, "Nothing's turning out right, but I just love the process." And that's the key. Even if things don't turn out perfectly, as long as you're enjoying the process, that's what matters. And to me, that's the path to success. Because if it's not working and you're not enjoying it, that's a problem. But if you're enjoying the process, even if things don't turn out perfectly, well, that's completely normal. Look here, we have this yellow light, like some kind of glow, and I need to show this yellow light reflecting on the roof. So I'm adding some yellow highlights right here. At the same time, we get this interesting mix of colours. My whole painting is based on these contrasts between blue and yellow. So let's move on. This part of the roof is a little less contrasty than the other one. I've purposely kept it lighter and more faded, using the same colours, but with less intensity. and we're adding texture because this part of the roof is farther back. By the way, sometimes the sun breaks through, but I hope it's not causing too much trouble. I would personally listen to this masterclass and then work on my own, turning the video off and fully immersing myself in the process. I'd listen to the tips, think about the composition and colour combinations, then look at the reference image and start drawing. You can save the picture or even print it out if you want. You don't have to copy it exactly. No need for geographic accuracy or a map of the area. The goal here is to focus on choosing colour combinations that you like. Now, this part of the building, the wall here, will be warm in colour. It's going to be a dirty brownish shade. And this house here will be yellow, while this one will be white. Though not really white. More like the colour it was before the blockade. Now it's a greyish faded white with some rusty stains from the roof. So this will definitely be a warm colour. Don't be afraid to add different textures too. You really need to immerse yourself in the process and just let go. If you keep focusing too much on what I'm doing and trying to repeat each step exactly, especially with watercolour, where every piece of paper dries differently, it won't work as well. Sometimes I just add colours intuitively and it's hard to explain, but that's part of the process. And if you manage to catch that feeling, that's when the magic happens. Unfortunately, I keep getting shadows in the way, and I wish you could see the whole painting. But no worries, you'll get a good look at it in the photo while you listen to me talk. Now, this roof here is red, but because it's shining in the sun, it even has a bit of a glow to it. So it's actually quite light, even with that reddish tint. I'm adding some red with a touch of orange to create that warm glow, which looks amazing on older buildings. It's not just for old buildings though. This technique works really well in a lot of places. What I want to point out is how nice it looks when you mix different colours within the same wash. For example, I'm adding some red, and you could leave some lighter areas, or even add some highlights. We'll still be working with tones and colours, especially since the background kind of merged together. We'll adjust that soon. This building here is yellow. Such a nice rich yellow. I'm mixing it with some brown and the orange I've been using throughout the painting. You see, I'm mixing them all in one wash to keep it flowing. And I love how these interesting washes are turning out. Once you let go of control and just play with the colours, it's magical. For some reason, I keep painting this wall again and again. This section keeps slanting, but look at how vibrant the orange turned out. Now, this roof here is going to be the darkest of them all. It's going to be a dark violet. I'm mixing cerulean blue or ultramarine with warm red, which gives it a nice dark purple. Here, I'm using the dry brush technique to leave some nice streaks of colour. I'll keep those streaks as highlights and let them stay. So now we have the main elements in place and it's time to add the details. I'll switch to a smaller brush and focus on the foreground first to keep it in the front. That way I don't end up adding too many details to the background and making it too heavy. The background can always be adjusted later if needed. I'm really happy with how the washes turned out here. It's such a joy when the washes come together nicely. Sometimes it's a bit tricky to get them just right, but when you're painting on camera it can be even harder. You want to make sure everything looks good. So here on this building there are some pretty strong shadows. They blend with the other house in the same tone, and again I'm keeping it free and loose. I didn't focus on making every little line perfect. I just added some quick strokes to give the feel of the texture. There are a lot of little details like ladders and things on the roofs, and I'm adding just a few strokes here and there to keep it fresh. I wanted to add a bit of red to this area. It looks great when you use the dry technique for details. This dry brush technique works so well in this part. I think that's enough for these houses now. I'm happy with how they're looking. Now, I'll add a few more shadows and some colour spots here and there. Just don't overdo it and keep the background light. What you see now is much brighter than what I started with, and that's the beauty of it. I'll show you the before and after. Look how much more vibrant it is now. So, go ahead. Try experimenting and don't be afraid of mistakes. Just learn from them. And remember to send me your work. I can't wait to see how it turns out. See you next time. And goodbye.